Hello, and a huge welcome to Gina Gardiner and Friends. I'm Gina Gardiner, and I'm joined today by a lady who is a real change maker. Her name is Scottlin, and she powerfully supports those people who have a real heart for humanity and who want to make a difference. They have a vision to make a positive difference and want to make impact in the world. She has so much to offer, and we're going to be talking about how you can make a positive change, and not only locally, but ultimately, how can you make a global impact? So, Anne, a huge welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Gina. I'm just delighted to be here and spend this time with you.
Thank you. Before we get started, tell me your story. How on earth did you get to be what you are today?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Um, well, it's a different story, I guess. I was not the typical American kid. I grew up in a very right-wing Christian cult, you might call it. My whole childhood was homeschooled. Not in the modern way where you have other friends get together twice a week, but in the old way, which was just me and my two little brothers out in a very rural environment where I was wearing long skirts, we were growing our own food and kind of preparing for the end of the world. And this is an odd way to sort of launch yourself into real life.
I should think it was pretty difficult making that sort of transition. How old were you?
I went to the first school I went to, which was a very, very tiny private high school, like 70 students and very conservative, it was high school. So I was almost 16 at that time when I first joined. And it was literally some of the best years of my life just because I'm such a social human. And I just lit up. I was like, um, so that was a huge boost in my life. And also a lot of, you're already a teenager and have all those emotions and hormones churning through your body, and learning how to adjust to kind of living by the rules of the group are different.
Yeah.
Taking things very hard was challenging, and,
Yes.
have very high standards for myself because, there's pretty much success or failure as far as how I saw the world. But moving from there and on through college, got married very pretty young, younger than I would recommend, to a kind person. But that ended up being, I was just not prepared for the real world, and they had a lot of real world experience, and so I was very gullible, and I was, not catching on to them living double triple lives. And when I finally did, um, and that relationship, that marriage was over, I really hit rock bottom.
I'm sure.
I Yeah, I didn't know. I kind of was like, who am I and where am I? I'd been through college, I had some degrees, but I hadn't been able to finish grad school, partly because of that relationship. So I wasn't in a place to start my career. I had never lived alone. I had never fully supported myself ever in my whole life. And, it's a very old fashioned, if you will, just a very old way of doing things. And plus, I was still within this religious environment, and divorce was not okay. And you just sort of felt like everybody left you at once.
That must have been very, very difficult. How did you move things forward?
Yeah, so well, one of the things I did, and this will come back to recurring throughout our conversation, I'm sure, was a wonderful person, a wonderful mentor of mine in my younger years had given me the advice. If you're ever just stuck in life, or you're emotionally overwhelmed, or you can't seem to get out of a depression, that you're in, if you want to create change in your life, find a way to go help others.
Yeah, my
And
dad used to say exactly the same thing.
that's beautiful. And so I did. I started, finally after, a year or two of sort of laying on the floor and watching TV and crying, I said, this is enough. This isn't hopeless. I'm going to make my own life a movie. which I literally did. I went out and I started finding humanitarian opportunities to get involved with. I worked with Amnesty International for many years. I was really, and that just turned all my lights back on. It gave me so much meaning and purpose. It got me out of my head and feeling, it's kind of an unkind thing to say, oh, they're feeling sorry for themselves, because I don't feel like that's a very empathic way to relate to others who are suffering.
No.
But from getting out of your own head and getting out of your own self focus, it was beautiful. And after working in some of that, I also ended up, total surprise and somewhat by accident, in Hollywood. I had been writing and written a play when I was 10. I had been published many times, in short form, and had always been interested in acting, but hadn't been in a culture that permitted really the arts per se, the liberal arts. And so I went to Hollywood for 10 years and became an actress and worked in some meaningful projects. And some of the ones that were most close to my heart were ones that had a humanitarian impact, where there was a docudrama or had a point, especially for empowering women in difficult circumstances in various places in the world. So that was sort of my midpoint in my recovery, if you will.
My goodness, if you were going to put two worlds, polar opposites, rural, very conventional, into Hollywood, it must have felt as if you were moving planets, not places.
It did. I really went through, quite honestly, an existential crisis at that point because between all of the personal and emotional and relationship confusion, identity crisis as far as who and what I was, a spiritual crisis, which, some people come from an extreme environment and they've resisted that sort of the religious aspects of it, but I had embraced it fully. I was what you'd call a true believer, right? So when real life hit, I had to I really rocked my world because, for one thing, that sort of spiritual grounding had been something I'd really counted on in my life. And I kind of felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. And so those years, working as an actress, being in a very unforgiving, hard environment, but I was kind of used to that, so it wasn't so bad. Was very challenging, and just finding my place and where the lights started pouring in for me was when I was asked by a studio to start. I was teaching some acting, and I was also coaching actors on the business side, and I
Mhm.
got very involved in coaching, training, and teaching. And this has been part of my life ongoing forever, since I was probably 12. So there was a very natural set of gifts there. And it was so fulfilling and so wonderful that eventually led me into, I got certified at the Executive College of Coaching in Santa Barbara, and then started my own practice and really moved into basically a two-pronged mission of emotional wellness, spiritual grounding, and, well, then they combine to humanitarian impact. How do we, as a collective, maybe even a collective consciousness, depending on your persuasion, how
Mhm.
do we, on our own, as this being here, how can I create global impact? How can I help make the world a better place? And that's become my focus.
So I'd really be interested, Anne, in exploring with you, how do you move the thinking from focusing on oneself to actually making a difference, and particularly on a global stage?
Yes. So it's such an amazing question, Gina, honestly, because it's such a big question. And I think that's where people get stuck, is it just feels so overwhelming. How do you make an impact as one person on a global stage? And it's so fascinating in the different ways it's really starts to begin with. This is very interesting because I hadn't planned to say this, with our own self-image, our own idea of what our personal empowerment is, how we value ourselves. Some people are really good at valuing others and doing kind things for others, but they're very unforgiving with themselves and very ruthless with themselves. So that's a place to start. That could be a whole separate conversation for another day. But
You see, I think it's so important that you say that, because I think everything starts with us.
Mhm.
And I talk a lot about taking radical responsibility for everything you think, feel, say, do, or not. But when you do that, I think not only are you empowered then to work in a very different way than you are when everything is about doing things for other people to try and mask how you feel about yourself.
Mhm.
But just by being the genuine, authentic you and owning that, you create a vibration, if you like, that actually spreads out. And
Mm.
from that point of being kind to yourself and being kind to others, I think that the ripple goes out. And as you're
Mhm.
kind to somebody else, so they're kind to other people, and so on.
Yes.
So we
Yes.
starting with the macro first, but I think when we start internally and do it from that way, we can
Mhm.
all make a global impact. And in fact, we do, either positively or negatively, all the time.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing that people forget is that you are making change and you're making an impact every moment. So, what is the impact you're leaving behind? It's not whether you leave an impact, it's what is the impact.
Absolutely.
So, if someone's always negative and complaining and determined to be miserable, and we've all been there, but if you would like to change the world, would you like to start with having some compassion for yourself, having the willingness to create a vision for what you can do? Think of a small child. And you've seen this happen. A small child can take one or two actions to warm someone's heart, to make someone's day by genuinely being themselves. Have you ever seen a child, outside or in the store, or, like they pick a flower in the yard and then they give it to someone and they watch that person's face light up? It's so simple. We get so stuck behind the mask that this has to come off like some shining 5-star success the first time out of the gate. As
Absolutely.
instead of the impact you start with at home and in your own natural environment, but it can be bigger. And that's where I encourage people with what I do and how I'm as a global impact coach, how I coach and teach people. You can make a much bigger impact than you know, and it's not necessarily as hard as you think.
I know before we started recording this, we were talking about that you do work with people, helping them create local projects. You
Mhm.
do much on a much bigger scale, but I think
Sure.
for those listening,
Hmm.
the first thing I'd say to you is, don't underestimate the power that you have. Small things can be very powerful. If you've ever spent a night in the room with a mosquito, you'll know that very little things have huge power to have an impact. I'm not suggesting you become the mosquitoes. Let me just say that. But ultimately, I think if we start to think about how can we make a difference in our locality,
Mhm.
that's a great place to start, isn't it?
Mhm.
And then to expand that into something bigger, if that's
Yes,
something that you want to do and it feels right for you.
absolutely. And I think that my first word of encouragement is, you know, dare to dream the dream, first of all. Don't just put it on a shelf and say that's always for someday later, when I retire, if I get rich. You can come up with a million excuses. Dare to dream the dream. See in your mind's eye, what does that look like? What would that look like if you were able to help this create this youth program or this program for children in your own local environment? Or I know someone who recently I was working with a client who is creating a rehab environment through animals and horses,
Yes.
helping people grow and recover. What are you already good at that you can share? What are you already passionate about that you were in an area where you would like to change? And then the second point is, remember, you're not alone. there are people who want to do this too. They might have the slightly different version, but there's people who are passionate about similar things, and you can find those people in your own environment, in your own local community environment, organizational environment. You can find them, and that instantly changes how possible this movement starts to become.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we tend, particularly when we're feeling that overwhelmed or that we don't feel resourced, we then see ourselves as a separate entity. We are on our own. It's all very difficult. But I think, collaboration done well is so powerful. And we've never been in a situation where it's easier to make contact with like-minded people than it is at the moment. Start
Absolutely.
a local Facebook group, for example. Be really clear about what it is you're trying to do, and the rules of engagement. I think that's important. What you expect of people to do and not to do in order
Mhm.
for this collaboration to move on and work well.
Absolutely. Yes. Creating a group of just like interests.
Yeah.
Starting a conversation. If I had to give someone one piece of one suggestion, if I was only allowed to give them one pointer in how to make an impact, it's start a conversation. Um, and if possible, not just in person, but virtually online, like you said, things like a Facebook group where you can start drawing in people who can then suggest it to their friends, who can suggest it to other people who have a similar passion or a similar background or experience, and they want to, we're in an area where they want to create change, because getting the conversation going is the beginning, and that gets people passionate. It helps remind them. It's so easy to just like push these things to the back of our minds. I do believe in it. I'm passionate about it, but
And of course, life always will get in the way if you allow it to. But one of the things that strikes me about doing what we're talking about at a local level is that there are many people who are lonely out there,
yeah.
who feel isolated. And this is an amazing way to actually not only help yourself, but help others while
Mhm.
you do it.
Yes, and we're revisiting the idea, and this goes all the way to global and starts local, the whole new concept of community.
Yeah.
This is new. It was already, burgeoning pre-COVID, and then, as time has gone past, even more than ever, where so many of our relationships are virtual, and there's pros and cons to that. But we also have this ability, if you are someone who can't get out, if you are someone who has to be very careful and stay home to be safe or well, or for whatever your reasons are, you now have this, it's a global community. My biggest challenge is finding a time slot where people from all over the world can come together and talk.
Well,
I mean,
as we record this, I'm in the UK, just north of Colchester. You're in the US. We're hours apart in terms of time zones, but we're talking together using technology.
yes, yes. So, and that's exciting too. And this is where this kind of the local spark can create a global influence very easily and quickly if you have any social media or if you have access to people who do. Because what you're doing locally is something that someone else somewhere else probably either is or wants to do locally. So if you're going to create a local movement, why would you do it all from scratch by yourself and reinvent the wheel? Why wouldn't you look all around your area, your city, your region, your country, your the world, and find other people doing the same thing? One, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now you can collaborate with them and find out what's working. And two, you may find new ways to create this. You're creating a global network just by having the conversation.
So before we do anything, where can people find you if they're interested in knowing more about your work or working with you?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Gina. Yes, on my website, which is just myname.com. So Anne, Anne, if you're listening, Scottlin, Scottlin, not the beautiful country, Scottlin, Lin, and Scotland.com. You can check out there what I do in my global strategic work, helping support nonprofits, individuals, and programs. So come by, check me out, and there's a lot of other things and resources there as well that you can find. I would have to ask for education because that's so close to my heart as a teacher and of wellness, as a whole person wellness. Yes, please. That's lovely.
Brilliant.
I love that.
And the other thing is that we give free meals based on the number of listeners. So just by listening to the show, you're helping somebody go to bed tonight with a full tummy rather than an empty one. So please do spread the word about the show. We've got a couple of minutes left. What's your final words, do you think, to people who are listening, making a global difference? How would you encourage them to take the first step, to get going and to do something?
Hmm. Realize the level of impact you can make. And that goes back to the valuing of yourself, to understanding. Accept that you are powerful. You're creating change all the time in some way or another. What kind of change are you creating? Because we can't leave it to all the leadership. We can't make everything about revolution and violence. It's meaningless and cause so much pain and suffering. But what we can do is start at the local level, start with something you care about, you're passionate about, use these incredible tools and gifts of having the ability to have a local, regional, national, global conversation virtually, in writing, in person, in person, virtually. Start having that conversation and just realize, it's that, we've all heard of the butterfly effect. It's really true. And
Mm.
what I like to think of also is, when you see those butterflies migrate, they're together in thousands and thousands. There's someone else, probably many other people who share what you're passionate about for change. So find those people and combine forces and find a way to start, even if it's small. And it feels amazing. And as you see those smiles change, as you see those tummies full, as you see those children getting a education or those new trees growing, you get that energy comes and you just want to do more. So it's not always easy, but it doesn't need to be lonely. You can have collaborators, friends, start a movement and enjoy your life by creating joy in life.
Great advice. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for being with us, listeners. Do engage with us again. I'd love to know your story and how you are. You can reach me at Gina, Gina, at Gina Gardiner and Friends. That's Gardiner and Friends. And you can find more about my work at genuinely-you.com. So thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next show. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.